Let's take a look at the purpose for your railroad. Now, if you're planning to do a prototype, a model of a prototype, a specific prototype, whether that's Pennsylvania Railroad, the Rio Grande Railroad, the Southern Pacific, a real railroad. If you're planning to model in detail an actual model, an actual railroad, and a place that it works, then you already know what the purpose of your railroad is. But if you're planning to do some freelancing or proto-lancing, you may not know, because you have a lot of freedom in figuring out what it is you want your railroad to do. The reason we look at this is because in order to build a realistic model, there has to be a reason for this railroad to exist. Without a reason, why are we doing this? So we're looking at, what does your model railroad haul? What is its cargo? What's the purpose? Now, purpose is going to be dependent on a lot of things. It's going to be dependent on when you're modeling, what era you're modeling, and it's also going to be dependent on the location. For example, if you are doing a model railroad through the Appalachian Mountains, chances are one of the main cargoes it's going to haul is coal. If you're doing a West Coast type of railroad and you're doing modern era, chances are that one of the main cargoes is going to be double stack containers. You know, these are the things that we look at when planning a model railroad, so that things don't look out of place. A lot of times when a person starts looking at building a model railroad, they look at what they like to see when a train goes by. And we all, you know, we're model railroaders. We like watching trains. Everybody else who gets stopped at a railroad crossing is impatient. They'd like to, you know, they want the train to get past so that they can go on. We sit there wishing we were at the front of the line so we could see more of the train. We want to see the locomotives go by. We want to count how many boxcars there are, how many tanker cars there are. We want to know how many cars there are on the train. Are there locomotives in the middle? Are there locomotives on the end? We enjoy watching trains. And we especially enjoy watching trains work, which is more than just going down the track. We like to see them switching in and out cars. We like to watch them spot cars and pull cars. That's fun for us. And so I think that's one of the main reasons why we get into model railroading. Well, when you start to look at what they're doing, you have to also look at why they're doing it. You know, what's in those box cars, or the covered hoppers, or the tank cars? What is it they're hauling, and why are they hauling it? Once you've answered that question, now you have a really good idea of why your railroad exists. What's the purpose for it? So when we look at these things, we're focusing in this video on what it hauls, but we have to also look at the era that it's hauling in, and we also have to look at the location. Those three things are so interconnected that a small change in one is going to change things in the other two. If you start with, for example, a coal hauler in the Appalachian Mountains, and we'll say in the 1940s, so transition era, end of steam, beginning of transition era, and you decide, well, okay, that's cool, I like that, but maybe I want to change it and I want to do a modern era. Well, okay, it could still be a coal hauler. There's plenty of coal that those trains still run. It's probably going to change what railroad you're going to model, because the railroads that existed in the 1940s, some of them still exist, but most of them don't. Most of them have been either run out of business or bought up by the bigger railroads. So it's going to change a whole lot of factors if you just change that one little thing. And if you change what the railroad hauls, you're going to change things like location. Let's say you don't want to do coal. You start with coal because you like watching unit coal trains, and you enjoy watching those hoppers full of coal going by. But then you decide, well, you know, if it's going to be a unit train, we could do double stack containers. Well, okay. There are probably double stack containers going through the Appalachian Mountains, but then there's a whole lot more that's going through southwestern United States from the West Coast. You know, all of the imports from China and Japan come through the West Coast. So that's probably going to change your location. And if you're going from coal to double stack containers, it's most definitely going to change your era, because they didn't have double stack containers in the 40s. They put everything in boxcars. So what your railroad does is going to affect most everything else about your model railroad. That's why it's so important to look at. You have to have a really good grasp of what your railroad does. And one of the best ways to do this is to do a little research. Now, I know what you're thinking. Research is boring, it's horrible. Last time I did a whole lot of research, I was in high school. Well, when I was in high school, we didn't have the internet. We did everything with encyclopedias. You don't have to do that anymore. Google is your friend. And you're going to hear me repeat that over and over again. Google is your friend. Because Google will allow you to find information on just about anything you can imagine, either to do with your model railroad or something completely different. By using Google, you can find out specifics about what a specific railroad went through each, the location you're thinking about working on. What did it haul? How often did it haul it? What else might it have hauled? Because while you may be thinking about a specific cargo, for example, coal, you're going to find that wasn't the only thing being hauled by railroads in the area that you want to model. There would have been a huge variety of things that went through that area. And by knowing what it's hauling, you're also going to know what type of cars to buy. What kind of rolling stock do you need to replicate that kind of a railroad? This is also going to help you later on when you're actually buying this stuff, because you'll know whether or not a specific car is useful for what your railroad hauls. If you are doing a coal haul type of railroad, you're probably not going to buy a whole lot of cattle cars. You're not going to need them. You may not need a whole lot of flat cars or tanker cars or covered hoppers. They may not have been part of the railroad of the era and location and what that railroad hauled. So it will save you a lot of money, because yeah, it's a neat car, I'd love to buy it, but it doesn't belong with what I'm modeling. This is, by doing this, you're narrowing your focus. You're instead of working with a whole bunch of stuff and just grabbing things that look cool, it's going to restrict you down to what you really need. And that's going to be helpful both in the pocketbook as well as keeping you on track, in line of planning this model railroad. The more focused your plan is, the better the chances are of actually completing it and building something. The people who don't bother to plan, people who just start laying track on a flat plywood surface, yeah, they can get an oval of track running, and they might even do a little bit of scenery, but it's not nearly as enjoyable or interesting as the can who takes the time to actually think about and research what they're doing. Because the more you can focus on your plan, the better off, the better your chances are of actually pulling it off and making it look good. So I want you to think very carefully about what you want to haul. What does your railroad haul? And it can be as simple as, well, I like boxcars, or I like tank cars, or whatever. The reason that it's hauling is completely up to you. You're the only one that matters as far as what your railroad hauls. That's your choice. And that's rule number one of model railroading. Rule number one for model railroading: it's my railroad. I do what I want. I'm giving you guidelines on how to build the model railroad and have a really good chance of being successful at it. So when I say think about what your railroad hauls, I'm very earnest about, I want you to do this. I want you to think very carefully about what your railroad hauls. But I also understand that you may be thinking, I want to do something completely fantastic. Okay, that's fine. That's great. You still have to know what your railroad's going to haul. Even if it's not an accurate representation of any specific location or time, you still have to have some idea of what your railroad is hauling. Why is it there? What's its function? What's its purpose? That's the entire reason for a railroad existing, is its purpose. And that's what knowing what it's hauling gives you. the purpose for the railroad existing. So think really carefully, and you probably already have ideas of what you want. That's great. The more ideas you have, the better off you're going to be. Because if you've got a whole bunch of ideas in your mind, you can pick and choose, and you can look at those ideas individually. You can do a little research on them and find out, okay, so if you know that you want your railroad to haul something, but you may not know what era, you may not know where, but you know you want it to haul coal. Well, now you start looking, you type in coal hauling railroads into Google, and it will give you a list of railroads and when they ran and where they ran. So you can now look at, okay, my location might be one of these 3 or 4 or 5, and my era is going to be, this era. And if my era is here, then my location is now narrowed down to these 2. It's all interconnected. These first 3 are extremely interconnected. You can't change something in one of them without changing something in the other 2. And that's something you have to really understand. When you're looking at this, take your time. And I can't stress that enough. Take your time researching. Find out exactly what it is you want to do. Because when you find out what it is, when you find something that matches what you want to do almost exactly, it won't be an exact match. But the closer you get to exactly what you want, the happier you're going to be. Now, more than likely, you've got in mind a specific real railroad that you'd like to model, or at least base things on. That's generally where we start with, most model railroaders start with, oh, I love the Rio Grande, so I want to model Rio Grande. Okay, that's great. What does the Rio Grande haul? Or in this case, what did it haul? It no longer exists. When did it run? Where did it run? Do you see how they're all interconnected? They affect each other. So, however you're coming at this, knowing what your railroad hauls, what its cargo is, what its purpose for existing is going to be it's going to have a major effect on the rest of your railroad. You have to make sure that you've got this stuff down cold. You've got to make sure that you understand backwards and forwards exactly what's going on with your railroad. Why does it do what it does? What's it called? What is it moving? Where is it moving it from, and where is it moving it to? How is it moving? Because again, how it moves something is going to be dependent on things like era. If you're working on a railroad that takes lumber from the sawmills and delivers it to lumber yards, well, before the transition era and into the transition era, all of that wood, all of that lumber, the 2x4s, the plywood, that would have been stacked inside boxcars. But in the modern era, it's going to be a center beam flat car. So again, your era is going to affect what kind of cars you get, as well as still hauling the same stuff, but based on when it's hauling it is going to determine what kind of cars you need for your model railroad. You have to understand this forwards and backwards, and I'm going to help you. I'm going to do my very best to help you understand exactly what it is you need to do and how you need to do it. That's what I'm here for, is to try and give you the information, at least in general terms, the information you need so that you can then feel comfortable going out on the internet and finding the details. That's really where what this entire thing is about, is helping you to find the details you need so that you can build the model railroad of your dreams. Even if it's just a small 2.5 foot shelf switching layout. As long as you're happy with it, as long as it does, as long as it keeps you occupied and you're enjoying the time with it, both the building, the planning, and the running of it. That's what's important here. And I'm just simply trying to help you get that enjoyment, the most of that, as much of that enjoyment as I can, by giving you the information you need to try and make it realistic, to make it to understand why this has the way it is. And there's going to be a lot of this in the planning stages, figuring out why. Why do they do this, not that? Especially when we get down to planning things like track work. Why do they do this instead of that? Well, there's a reason for it. And the reason really comes down to money for the prototype railroad. Spend as little money as you can, as you absolutely have to get the results that you want. Well, why shouldn't we do the same thing? Spend as little money as we have to get the results that we want. And by planning all this stuff out, by figuring out why your railroad exists, what is it hauling, that's going to help you to keep expenses down, because like I said, you'll know what you need to buy. You'll be tempted to buy the coolest this or the newest that. Absolutely, we're all tempted. But if you've already got the planning down, if you've already figured out what you're doing and why you're doing it, you can go, okay, that would be great to own. I'd love to have one. But really, for the price of that, I can get 3 of these. And these I really need for my railroad. So we need to look at what your railroad hauls. What's its purpose? Is it, for all, it could be that it hauls people. Depending on the era and location, people could be the main cargo for your railroad. Okay, well, that means you're going to need passenger cars. It really is simple when you look at it. When you start to break these things down into small bite-sized chunks, you start to realize, okay, this is what's going on, this is what I need, this is why it's happening. So I want you to do some research. I want you to look at why your railroad exists. What's its purpose? And once you've got that, then we'll look at era and location.